I think we're starting to shift our thinking about systems, especially following the pandemic and with all of the kind of multi-crises in the world. But I think we still very much are at a point where we think of systems as institutions. So like the legal system, the economic system, the educational system, and we're kind of addressing those systems separately and institutionally, whereas the system on a much deeper level is how I like to think about it. And that system is actually the intellect. So what we know, why we know it, and how that makes us show up in the world. And that really is the place where we need to implement shifts. And I think that's something that's really serious work, because otherwise what ends up happening is that we create these new institutions. So we shift policy in the legal system, or we devise new educational tactics, and we bring in good policies that are working toward equality. And of course, these things are really important, and especially with new technologies that help us to make shifts in institutions. But so long as we don't change the intellect, which is the deep system, then even though we develop new technologies, for instance, we end up eventually replicating and even sometimes increasing the same old problems. So I wrote a book in 2020, so a couple of years ago, called Sensuous Knowledge. And it's a book about a new approach to knowledge, because knowledge is ultimately what creates our intellect. So, what we know in the world and what is considered to be true in the world. And so my book is kind of challenging the conventional education that we receive. And I call that system Europatriarchal knowledge. So an approach to knowledge that is, as the term implies, biased toward Eurocentricity and male centricity. But the point is not so much to critique that, because it's obvious that biased knowledge is incomplete knowledge and it can't really fundamentally change our intellect. The point is more so to, in my work, what I was looking at and what I've continued to develop is what are the characteristics of Europatriarchal knowledge. So I really wanted to understand that so that we can shift it. And some of the characteristics, it's a whole book, but just very briefly, it's an approach to knowledge that is kind of worships reason and rationalization, qualities which I find very important, and I speak about that in the book. Like, without those qualities, knowledge becomes indelicate. So I'm not saying we should shun that, but the kind of worship of it leads to systems that are rigid and make us robotic, and ignore the kind of wider, deeper ecosystems that we live in. And so my book, which is titled Sensuous Knowledge, is a more holistic approach to knowledge production that thinks about more than human life, that brings in the arts and the embodiment and things like that into how we approach knowledge. There are examples. I think, we're seeing a lot of conversations in the present moment are like, we're having this conversation. There's more openness to systems change in civic discourse. But I think maybe part of the problem is that we want to always find the hope. And I don't think that we should, do away with hope. Of course, that's really important. But I think what we need to encourage at the moment is that there is joy in seriousness, in really taking the crises that our world faces, inequality, climate crisis, wars, all of that, really seriously, and not trying to apply like a superficiality around them. But from that, actually what emerges, and maybe that is the hope that I have and a kind of positive thing to bring, is that what emerges from that is a sense of clarity, and from clarity comes a sense of joy, because that's when we understand the world that we find ourselves in better. And that's really something that I think a lot of us are wanting and seeking at the moment. be bolder. If there's one message that I like to share with people watching this is, just be 5% bolder tomorrow than you are today. And I say that because I think we already know what needs to be done, what needs to be said. We feel it intuitively, quite often, most of us, but we're still lacking the courage to express those things, and it's going to come differently for everyone. But if each of us can be 5% bolder, which isn't much, and then we can incrementally step it up, then I think we'd start to really perceive a shift in the system.